going to do some short rows now. I'm knitting the Christmas Advent stocking and I've got to the heel turn, and for the heel turn we're going to do short row shaping. So you can see I've done one day of it already. So short rows mean if you go so far and then instead of finishing the row you turn around and go back again. So you can see I've got a lot more rows here than I have here. This is my stocking. I'm going to continue round doing short rows until I've got a nice wedge of a heel and then carry off on the foot. So short rows are really handy for shaping all sorts of things, but if you just knit your requisite number of stitches and then turn, then you're going to get a hole here. If you start knitting back again, there'll be a hole. So wrap and turn is a way of avoiding the hole. So the instructions say that when you start this day, and we start here at the beginning of the round, it says knit 32 W and T, wrap and turn. So here we go, 30, 31, 32. So all we're doing to avoid a hole here, we're going to wrap this yarn around this stitch that we haven't worked. Now you can see I've done it twice on the previous round. So to do that, all we're going to do, we're in garter stitch, so it's somewhat more straightforward than stocking stitch, but it applies the same on stocking stitch. So we've got the yarn at the back, so we're going to slip that stitch, the next stitch that we're wrapping, onto the right hand needle. We're then going to bring the wool to the front as if we're going to purl, then we're going to slip it back. And now if we put it back to the back, you can see that this burgundy yarn has wrapped around this stitch, and that is going to hold those two together so that when we turn, and actually we do want the wool back there because we're knitting, when we turn then we start knitting back this way. So our next instruction is knit 64, wrap and turn. So when we start knitting again, you should see that this stitch is nice and close to this stitch and there isn't a gap forming. Now you'll see as we go along the previous wrapped stitches on the rows below. So after, there should be one round about here, so you can see there, that's the wrap stitch from the row below. Now when you're doing garter stitch, those wraps aren't noticeable because you've got little garter stitch bumps, but you might want to hide those wraps if you were knitting in stocking stitch, because you would get a nice smooth bit of stocking stitch and then a little bar where your wrap is. So you can hide the wraps by knitting them in afterwards on the next row, which I'll show you when I get past the beginning of the round. So I'm now doing knit 64, which is going to take me all the way around to the other side. I'm going to wrap and turn, then I'm going to work shorter and shorter rows on each subsequent pass to build up more stitches here and fewer over here. I don't like this as a sock heel turn because I don't find it fits as well as a heel flap, but it is fine for a Christmas stocking because no one's going to be wearing it. So we're back to the beginning of our round, so that's our knitted 32, and then we're going to slip marker and do another 32 to get us to the knit 64, which is our instruction before we do our next wrap and turn. So I'll show you a wrap from this side. Ignore this where I've been weaving in the end as I go along. So this is our split stitch. This is our wrapped stitch here. So if you were doing stocking stitch and you didn't want that little bar sitting there, then you can pick it up with the point of your needle and then go in, and then you knit those two together as if you were knitting two together, and that pushes it to the back and hides it. Now I'm actually on the wrong side here, so I wouldn't want to do that anyway, but it's very easy to do. So I'm going to knit 64, which will take us down here. Talk amongst yourselves for a minute. Just be careful you don't knit those two together if the wrapped stitch is sitting close to the stitch before it. Fewer rows as we work to the thin end of the wedge. And there's another wrap stitch. So we're just knitting over the top of the wrap stitches. We'll do another wrap and turn. 63, 64. So there's our knit 64. And then we're going to pick up that stitch, slip it onto the needle. Then I'm going to bring the wool to the front, and we're going to slip it back. If the wool will stay at the front, please. Slip it back onto that needle, and now it's wrapped around. We don't need to bring the wool forward because on the way back we're going to be knitting with the wool at the back. So the next instruction will be to knit 56, which will take us to 8 stitches before the end. Over here where we'll wrap and turn again and back. So work backward and forwards to bring the heel round in a nice wedge. There we go, wrap and turn.